regarding what you are selling as your personal reputation and your trust. So you are going in and putting your reputation on the line, and you are saying, look, I also have a 5 people startup. And yes, I have a lot of hard time in building the product. I have a very hard time in supporting it. I will have a very hard time in updating it. I'll have a very hard time in, raising the money. But believe me, you have my personal, promise that I'm going to deliver. And that only a founder and a CEO can say that. If a VP of sales says that, or VP of marketing, no customer is going to believe it.
Go ahead.
Hello sir, so I have a question that we read in rules of entrepreneurship that the money available with startups are very limited. So you have to preserve your money and spend it in very correct duration at very correct points. So how did you figure them out in Playspan?
Sorry, how did you
manage
the last part?
cash flow?
So it's like, how do you spend your money? Where do you allocate spending?
How did you realize that this particular option is not worth spending and the other option is worth spending because you have limited money as a startup?
Sorry, are you saying, how do you decide where to spend?
Yes.
Or
how do you decide where to spend? That's it.
Yeah, the question actually two facets. One is how do you decide what to spend on and what not to spend on? And the second one is how do you decide to, go for it in terms of really spending your cash on? To hire expensive people or buy new equipment or hire a lot of engineers or expand? How do you make those two decisions?
well, so first of all, you never spend any money on sales and marketing. Okay, so easy. I will tell you where not to spend money first, because that's easy. So any startup which is trying to spend money in the first 12 months, or it's not about timing, but unless you don't have your first few customers, you just cannot spend any money on sales and marketing. Okay? You cannot spend money on going to conferences and paying conference fee and traveling, all of that. You are expected that you are going to learn something from all the free resources, but you can't say I want to learn things, because you are expected that you are hitting the ground running. So any person in your company says I want to go to this conference and that conference, the wrong guy. And you don't spend any money on practically you don't have any travel and entertainment budget either, because essentially the first, until you don't get the product out, the only place that you spend money is in product development. Okay? So the people who are involved in product development, whether it is hardware or software or whatever service or whatever you want to do, only product development. And then you spend just a little bit of whatever the travel or money that the CEO has to spend to go out and get the first few customers. Right. So that's it. And once you have the money spent on, once you have a pretty good indication that the product is working and you have initial customers who are very happy, then you start spending little by little money on sales and marketing. So I think basically that's the process.
How, as you pivot or as you change your direction, how do you communicate that to all the employees and to your investors get company buy-in, as the CEO you're making, or the founder you're making directional changes to the whole business plan? What is your process?
Yeah. Well, that is the great question, and it is probably the toughest thing that you have to do as a startup entrepreneur. And probably unless you are super lucky, 9 out of 10 companies has to go through some pivot, minor or major. I would say even 90% of them have to do even some major pivots. And I think communication, the best way to communicate is that to communicate frequently. Because if you are in the habit of communicating frequently, what will happen is that as the reality is changing every day, you are also communicating that reality, and they already know how the reality is changing. So when you make a decision that we are not going north, but we are going west, we are not going west, we are going east, the people don't feel that this guy is gone crazy and he doesn't know what he's doing. Oh my God, we were already down this path and now we have to take a whole U-turn. It's like, and startup is like, think about it. Startup is like going to climbing Mount Everest, right? And Raj is a big mountain climber, so I thought of using that metaphor, right? And it's super hard, right? So you start the climbing, and like after 2-3 days, whatever, you're like super tired. Your half of your ammunition is already burned out, whatever food, everything that you're carrying. Maybe first few days or weeks, whatever it is. I don't know. I've never climbed mountains, so I can use that metaphor very perfectly. How we can find 100 parts in using it. But what I mean to say is that once you do that, you're like a startup who's already climbing that uphill. It's a startup with an uphill climb. And after people have climbed, halfway, and they are tired, and then suddenly the guy, the captain or the team lead says that, for the last like 3 weeks or whatever, we've been climbing on the wrong mountain. We actually have to go, do you see that mountain on your right hand side? We have to actually climb that mountain, so now let's walk down what we have been walking up for the past 3 weeks. And then we're going to start all over again to start climbing that mountain. Right? So the reaction you're going to get from your team is like, okay, hell with you. You're going to say like, what, pardon my language. Basically they're going to say, what the hell? And it's a very hard thing, right? Very, very hard thing for both the captain, the lead to decide, hey, we gotta now back and reclimb the whole thing to a totally new mountain, and people are gonna blame you. Your troops are gonna blame you as a captain by saying, are you so stupid at all? Didn't you see that mountain on the right hand side before? And you made us climb all the last 3 weeks, and we're already out of food and medicine and everything. Like, are you out of your mind? You're dumb, you're stupid, whatever, right? And the guy will say, like, look, I just didn't see it. So I think the only, and by the way, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. It happens, as I said, in 80 to 90% of the startups. Unless you're super lucky, like Dropbox, which got it right the first time, or on Google that got it right in the first time. There are only like 8 or 10 companies that you can count with the fingers on your two hands that kind of got it right the first time. They were riding on a lucky streak. Everybody else had to do something. So the main thing is the answer to last question is if you are communicating frequently, then you don't have to communicate big chunk like a 1 gigabyte worth of data. You will only want to communicate a few kilobytes of data. But you already have the other kilobytes over every single day.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Go ahead.
So how you make sure that the employees you are hiring are perfectly suitable for your requirement?
Well, there are two things that we look for in an employee. Number one is talent, and number two is attitude. And it's not in that order because the order it varies from company to company and stage to stage. So, if you are an early stage company trying to build a breakthrough technology, you would say, I would put a higher weightage on talent and I would put less weightage on attitude. Because it's the talent that is going to create a breakthrough technology, and even if the person has a bad attitude, I will tolerate the bad attitude. Okay? And other people won't get affected with that bad attitude because they don't recognize the talent. And then as you grow, when you are a little bit stable, that your product is already successful in the market, you always want to reverse that, and you want to hire people with the best attitude, even sometimes if they don't have the best attitude, because assuming that they can learn fast.
Go.
So, as a startup, we always have to be on our toes, right? Continuously iterating our product for the customer requirement, making fast decisions, pivoting and all those stuff, right? How would you differentiate this strategy with what you learned from your first two companies, right? You mentioned that the mistakes you learned from your first two companies was don't grow too fast. How will you differentiate those two things?
Yeah, so I think there's a fine balance between the two, and always the balancing of anything is very hard, right? And the balancing act here is that on one hand you have the pressure to grow very fast. On the other hand, if you grow too fast, it can become the reason for your failure as well. And if you don't grow fast enough, it can also become the reason for your failure. So it is like walking in a tightrope. If you lose the balance of that tightrope, on the left side also you can fall, on the right side also you can fall. So there is no magic formula for how much to grow. It is very much a personal judgment call that you're doing. It's like playing tennis. And when your opponent in tennis, when he sends back, a softball, and you have to decide, like, you have a really soft ball, and you want to know, you can either hit it hard, and you try to hit it hard, you may lose, you may try to hit it soft, you can lose, so it's not all different. How are you going to hit the ball?
Okay. I think last question. Anybody else has a question? Okay. 3 more questions. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, hello. I actually have a couple of questions. First question is a follow-up of the hiring equation that we need to get the people with the right talent and attitude. So, do you leave that judgment to to your team of co-founders, or do you need to get external help, something like agile consultancy or something like that? The second question is that in Playspan, once you had a scalable, repeatable business model, and you were going into the company building phase, the culture, did the culture of the company change somehow? And how did you shape that culture from the startup culture to a company?
Good question.
Sure. I think the first question is very easy. You cannot outsource hiring. I mean, you can depend on outside recruiters to bring you resumes, but you cannot outsource the talent evaluation assessment. You as a founder and your core management team has to make a decision, and it's good to have a consensus. Not just the founder or the CEO, because every person has a blind spot. So you should also have minimum 3 people look at a person. Minimum. And because each person, we're all very different. All the 3 people are going to look at that candidate from a different perspective. And somebody's going to catch something that you're not going to catch. And you just cannot give it to an outside company to do that. Your own core team will strong vision and core mission is at the top. They have to mission. The second question in terms of shaping the culture is the culture kind of shifts a little bit, well, not a little bit. It kind of starts changing on its own, but